Welcome back to our channel, dedicated fans of the boldest and most beautiful drama on television. Today is a truly magnificent day to dive deep into the glamorous, yet incredibly chaotic world of our favorite Los Angeles fashion dynasties. The drama is reaching an absolute boiling point, and we are here to unpack every single shocking detail. Let us jump right into the explosive events awaiting us. The crashing waves outside the beach house serve as a mocking, relentless soundtrack to the absolute destruction of Will Spencer's life. Since the catastrophic, violent altercation at the bikini bar where his fist accidentally collided with Eric, Forrester's face during a brawl with R.J. Forrester, Will has been spiraling into a dark, suffocating abyss of depression. The beach house, once a sunlit sanctuary for his blossoming romance with Electra Forrester, has devolved into a chaotic mess of empty bottles, unwashed clothes, and the lingering, suffocating stench of crushing regret. Will has been drowning his sorrows in alcohol, entirely unable to process the sheer magnitude of his failures. He lost his position at Forrester Creations, he alienated his family, and most devastatingly, he lost the absolute love of his life. However, just when Will believed he had hit rock bottom, the situation has managed to plunge even deeper into an unimaginable nightmare entirely orchestrated by the calculating and ambitious Melissa Dillon. The arrival of Electra Forrester at the beach house is not the romantic, tearful reconciliation that Will has been desperately praying for in his darkest moments. Instead, Electra stands in the doorway like an avenging angel, her eyes blazing with a mixture of profound heartbreak and absolute, unfiltered disgust. Will is immediately thrown off balance, entirely oblivious to the devastating betrayal that has just unfolded behind his back. He stares at Electra, his alcohol-addled brain struggling to comprehend the sheer intensity of the fury radiating from her posture. The truth, however, is far more sinister than Will could have ever anticipated. Melissa Dillon, the woman who had capitalized on his vulnerable, intoxicated state to spend the night cuddling on his sofa, has completely flipped the script. After explicitly demanding that Will keep their intimate night a closely guarded secret to protect her lucrative new job as a Forrester assistant, Dillon has committed the ultimate act of sabotage. She marched directly to Electra and confessed everything, weaponizing their night together to permanently obliterate any remaining emotional bridge between Will and his former love. As Electra unleashes her fury, Will finds himself staggering in a haze of confusion and profound betrayal. He frantically attempts to explain the context of that fateful night, his voice cracking with desperation as he tries to dismantle Dillon's calculated narrative. Will insists that the situation with Melissa Dillon was absolutely not what it appeared to be. He desperately tries to paint the picture of a broken, intoxicated man who simply passed out on his own sofa, completely devoid of any malicious or romantic intent toward Dillon. But his frantic explanations only serve to dig his grave deeper. Will is entirely baffled by Dillon's sudden, shocking transformation into a paragon of truth. He cannot understand why the woman who was so terrified of losing her position at Forrester Creations would suddenly risk everything to blurt out a secret she had begged him to keep. Why, after swearing him to secrecy, would Dillon suddenly decide to play the role of Miss Honesty? The answer, which remains tragically elusive to Will in his panicked state, lies in Dillon's ruthless ambition and calculated manipulation. Dillon recognized that as long as Will harbored hope for Electra, she would never truly possess the Spencer heir. By confessing the secret under the guise of an overwhelming, guilty conscience, Dillon masterfully positioned herself as the honest victim while simultaneously delivering the fatal blow to Will and Electra's relationship. Electra, however, is entirely unreceptive to Will's desperate, stammering pleas. Her Forrester pride, already severely wounded by the brutal corporate war initiated by Hope Logan's defection and Will's previous corporate lies, cannot sustain another humiliating blow. She views Will's inability to establish boundaries with Dylan as the ultimate, unforgivable betrayal. For Elektra, the image of Dylan bragging about spending the night in Will's arms is permanently burned into her consciousness. She refuses to be the collateral damage in Will's chaotic, destructive spiral, leaving him completely shattered as she turns her back on him, seemingly for the final time. Meanwhile, across the sprawling city of Los Angeles, the walls of the luxurious Cliff House are echoing with a different, yet equally devastating kind of conflict. Steffy Forrester Finnegan is already stretched to her absolute psychological and emotional limits. She is actively fighting a grueling, high-stakes corporate war, desperately attempting to salvage Forrester Creations' reputation and Eric's haute couture line in the wake of the catastrophic public relations nightmare caused by Logan Creations. The absolute last thing Steffy needs in her life right now is a severe marital crisis, yet that is exactly what her husband, John Finn Finnegan, is bringing directly to her doorstep. Despite his previous, solemn vows to prioritize their family's safety and keep his psychopathic biological mother far away from their children, Finn's deeply ingrained, empathetic nature is once again proving to be his greatest, most dangerous weakness. Sheila Carter's recent, highly theatrical display at the hospital dropping to her knees, weeping uncontrollably, and begging for a second chance has successfully penetrated Finn's emotional armor, blinding him to the lethal reality of her true nature. Finn approaches his exhausted wife with a delicate, yet entirely misguided and catastrophic proposition. He attempts to balance his fierce loyalty to Steffy with the undeniable, biological pull he feels toward the woman who gave birth to him. Finn carefully suggests that Steffy should reconsider her absolute, uncompromising ban on Sheila, proposing a highly controlled compromise that he believes could solve their agonizing dilemma: supervised visitations. Finn argues with a terrifying level of medical naivety that granting Sheila a tiny, monitored sliver of access to him and their young son, Hayes, might be the only viable way to prevent her from spiraling into complete, unhinged madness. He insists that establishing a secure, supervised connection could pacify Sheila's obsessive desires, framing the suggestion as a strategic, preventative measure rather than an emotional concession. He desperately reiterates that Steffy and their children remain his absolute, unwavering priority, hoping that his calm, rational tone will soothe his wife's inevitable anxieties. However, for Steffy Forrester Finnegan, this proposition is nothing short of a profound, soul-crushing betrayal. The mere mention of Sheila Carter in proximity to her precious children is enough to trigger Steffy's severe, deeply rooted PTSD. Steffy's reaction is immediate and visceral. The sheer audacity of Finn's request ignites a blinding, protective fury deep within her soul, resurrecting the traumatic, blood-soaked ghosts of her past. She stares at her husband in absolute, paralyzed horror, entirely unable to comprehend how the man who has sworn to protect her is actively advocating for their greatest, most lethal tormentor. The memories of the dark alley, the deafening sound of the gunshot, and the agonizing sight of Finn bleeding out on the pavement come rushing back with terrifying clarity. Steffy is now facing an agonizing, heartbreaking realization. The existential threat to her family is not just lurking outside her heavily guarded door. It is being actively invited into their sanctuary by her own husband. The foundation of the sin marriage begins to violently fracture under the immense weight of Finn's dangerous empathy. The intricate web of psychological manipulation extends far beyond the tense confines of the Cliff House, reaching into the most unlikely and dangerous of places. Sheila Carter, having officially signed the divorce papers to legally free Deacon Sharp, is currently executing a masterful, multi-layered campaign of emotional warfare. Having realized that Taylor Hayes will never advocate for her, and recognizing the volatile state of Steffy's mind, Sheila turns her predatory attention to a shocking new target, Dr. Lee Finnegan. The dynamic between Sheila and Lee is historically rooted in a foundation of intense hatred, rivalry, and near-fatal violence. After all, Lee is the fiercely protective mother who secretly saved Finn's life after Sheila shot him, and Sheila subsequently retaliated by running Lee off the road in a fiery, near-lethal car crash. Yet, in the twisted, unpredictable, and ever-shifting world of Los Angeles, the rigid lines between mortal enemies and potential allies can blur in a single, desperate instant. Sheila approaches Lee Finnegan, brilliantly stripping away her usual menacing, calculating facade to reveal a broken, heartbroken, and utterly defeated woman who has lost absolutely everything. She pours her dark, twisted heart out to Finn's adoptive mother, weeping genuine-looking tears over the agonizing loss of Deacon to Taylor Hayes. Sheila expresses her desperate, suffocating hope for a final chance to reconnect with her beloved son and her precious grandchildren. She plays the role of the tragic, misunderstood victim with Oscar-worthy precision, knowing exactly which emotional buttons to press to elicit a reaction from the stoic doctor. Sheila's theatrical desperation is a calculated maneuver designed to exploit any lingering vulnerabilities within Lee's typically impenetrable psychological armor. Astonishingly, Lee Finnegan does not immediately reject Sheila's emotional, weeping display. There is a deeply complex, underlying psychological current at play beneath the surface of their tense interaction. Recently, Lee inadvertently offered Sheila a false sense of security regarding the romantic entanglement between Deacon and Taylor. Lee had confidently assured Sheila that Taylor's strict professional ethics as a world-renowned therapist would absolutely prevent her from pursuing a romantic relationship with a former patient like Deacon. Now that Taylor and Deacon are happily and publicly moving forward together, leaving Sheila in the dust, Lee harbors a lingering, uncomfortable sense of guilt for misleading the volatile woman, however unintentionally. Lee, a woman who prides herself on her integrity and honesty, feels a strange, misplaced sense of responsibility for contributing to Sheila's current state of emotional devastation. Sheila brilliantly capitalizes on this microscopic, almost imperceptible crack in Lee's armor. As Sheila tearfully begs for an advocate, someone to simply listen to her side of the story, Lee actually finds herself contemplating the unthinkable, stepping up to defend Sheila Carter. Lee's internal conflict is profound and paralyzing. She recognizes the inherent, lethal danger of validating Sheila's obsessive desires, knowing firsthand the catastrophic, bloody consequences of Sheila's unpredictable, violent nature. She remembers the terror of the fiery car crash and the agonizing months spent hiding a comatose Finn. Yet, a small, dangerously empathetic part of Lee wonders if a small, controlled concession might truly be the key to neutralizing the explosive threat that Sheila poses. Lee begins to heavily weigh the terrifying risks against the potential rewards of advocating for her former enemy. If Lee Finnegan decides to champion Sheila's twisted cause and actually approaches Steffy with a plea for leniency, it will undoubtedly ignite an apocalyptic, multi-generational war within the Finnegan family. Steffy is already facing an immense, crushing amount of pressure from Finn's wavering loyalty. To have Lee, the woman who saved Finn's life and understands Sheila's evil better than anyone, suddenly switch sides and advocate for the devil would be the ultimate, devastating betrayal. Steffy would find herself completely isolated, surrounded by family members who have seemingly fallen under Sheila's dark, manipulative spell. As those closest to Steffy begin to shockingly question whether Sheila deserves one final opportunity to prove her redemption, Steffy is pushed dangerously closer to a psychological breaking point. The walls are rapidly closing in on the fierce Forrester matriarch, and her impending response to this multi-front assault will undoubtedly shape the future, safety, and legacy of her family for generations to come. The stage is set for an explosive, unforgettable confrontation that will shatter lives and redefine loyalties forever.